now. So, hi everyone. Thanks for joining today's seminar series organized by the Empathic Computing Laboratory. I'm your host Pi, and our guest speaker for today is Tom Furness, who is currently a professor of industrial and system engineering with adjunct professorship in electrical and mechanical engineering and human-centered design and engineering at the University of Washington. So he's widely known as the grandfather of VR, founder of HITL Lab, and founder of the Virtual World Society. His current research interest includes exploring the use of peripheral vision and investigations into photon emissions from the retina. The title of his talk today is A New Vision for a Better Reality, which is about lessons he learned during the development of VR and its applications. So the talk will be roughly an hour, and then later on we will have a brief Q&A session about 30 minutes. Without further ado, I hand it over to you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Pi, and thanks everyone. Delighted to be here. Always enjoy returning to New Zealand, even if it's only virtual. As you probably know, I spent about 15 years living at least part of the year, every year, for 15 years until about 2015 in Christchurch. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm really here to answer questions more than anything else that you might have on my journey. Part of that journey, as a matter of fact, a large part of that journey has been with Mark. He and I, well, we sort of got started together in about 1990, I believe, Mark. And
yeah, it's about, I was an intern in your lab in 1990.
Yeah. So it's been a while. So more than half of my career, I've been associated with Mark. So what I wanted to talk about today is sort of I guess a fusion of a lot of things, but it sort of boils down to this whole notion of vision. So let me start sharing my screen. So I'm host now, so I can do that, right? Okay. Hopefully you can see that. You see my vision slide?
Yep. Good.
Okay, that's a good sign. Okay, so vision. So it turns out about 3,000 years ago, a famous king said, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Now, we're not sure what King Solomon meant by vision, but we could say, well, it probably has to do with hindsight. It probably has to do with foresight. It probably has to do with insight. It may even have something to do with imagination, dreams, creativity. But basically what it means is going beyond yourself or looking beyond yourself. And if we don't do that, he's saying we're going to perish. Now, it turns out, we'll fast forward a little bit to the 19th century, where one of the, I guess you'd say, the fathers of modern psychology, William James, said this: while it's part of what we perceive comes through our senses from the object before us, another part, and it may be the larger part, always comes out of our own mind. Wow. So that means basically what our vision is actually modulated by what's in our own mind. Let me turn on another light here. Okay, so here we have a situation where we are closing the loop with our experiences in the world. And from the experiences we have, we build models. As a matter of fact, that's the way we can reduce bandwidth in terms of all the things that are flowing into our senses. We form these models and then we work a lot with those models. But those models are going to be limited in terms of how we can build it based upon our experiences. So taking into account what James was saying here, there are real limitations to model building that are based upon the filters we have for our vision. And those filters are based on the models we built based upon our own personal experiences. So this reminds me of the old story about the blind men, the 6 blind men around the elephant. So here, each of these, you see they're blindfolded, they can't see. And each of them are examining a part of the elephant. Now, I'm sure you've seen this before. And so what they're doing is going by sort of touch and probably smell, and they're trying to relate to the other blind men what an elephant is like. So, one who's standing in the front there says, "Oh, the elephant's like a spear," and another one says, "No, it's like a garden hose, or a fan, or a wall, or a tree, or a rope." The interesting thing about it is every one of them are correct, but they don't have the whole picture. And they're trying to communicate to the other guys, and the other guys are saying, "Nonsense. It's not based upon what I'm experiencing. It's this way." Versus another guy says, "No, it's this way." So the problem is none of them actually see the whole elephant. They only see a small part of the elephant based upon the limitation of what's coming into their senses. So let's go to the other end of the spectrum and say, all right, I want you to come with me. Put on your headsets. Now, you guys know all this stuff, so I realize that. I'm sort of speaking to the choir. But let's just, for kicks, take a romp by just changing the way we see and see what happens. Okay, let's go juggle on the moon, right? Be a lot easier to juggle on the moon than it would be on the Earth with reduced gravity. Or we can juggle on Jupiter if we're really an expert juggler. Or what if we wanted to walk at the speed of light and see what happens in terms of the way that shape changes? We can look to ahead, look behind, look to the side, see what happens, at least what we think theoretically. Or what if we could make our interpupillary distance 10,000 light years and then look at the universe or look at a galaxy and basically see it in depth as a three-dimensional object? Or what if we could shrink ourselves to the size of a red blood cell and go inside in this blood flow, and see what happens in the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the tissues of the body? Or what if we could actually walk on the surface, the atomic surface of a soap bubble? Or what if we could expand our vision actually as a training system to teach us how to use the vision we already have? For example, what a lot of people do is they shut off what they see in the periphery because we're looking at screens all the time. And we're not looking for saber-toothed tigers that are going to come in from the side and eat us. But the receptors are still there. Or what if we could see through another person's eyes, where they're located, what they're looking at, getting their vantage point? And in the process, when we look at ourselves in a mirror, we look different than we think we do. We may have black skin. We may have a different gender. We may be a lobster. Well, what if we could now guide some things? Let's look at this, for example. I don't want to back up there and not get on too fast here. What if we could now use a remote surgeon to guide our actions to teach us how to do surgery, spinal surgery, where we have a guide and an embedded expert that's inside of us? Or what if we could create 3D within 3D? Now, I'm sure you guys have seen that before. Did you hear the sound, by the way? Okay. So I want you to notice something here. There was a one frame in this sequence that you may not have noticed. Look at the expression on her face. What if you could walk into the building before it's constructed? As a matter of fact, even look out the window on the second floor at December the 16th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and see what you see. Where is the sun? And maybe fast forward for several years to see what's happening with the landscape and the other things that are going to be built around this building. What if you could even build the building without having any blueprints? Basically, the blueprint being replaced by a three-dimensional building that's on site, precisely located, and all you do is put matter where the bits are located. Or what if you could pilot a starship with your family? As a matter of fact, you're in this starship and you're flying at warp speed so you can visit other galaxies and look for planets that could support life and learn astrobiological principles and even fly out one of the shuttle ports and land on the planet and examine it. And you do that as a family and you work together to take this expedition in piloting this starship and learning the importance of working together and to relying on each person's perspective in order to solve problems. Or what if you could be with your grandmother? She's 3,000 miles away, and you could help her celebrate her birthday by taking her to Machu Picchu, where she's always wanted to go. And you can be there with her and then examine the sites. And when in fact she's not capable of flying anywhere, but just staying in her retirement home. Or let her go and share the birthday party for her grandchild, again 3,000 miles away, and be there in real time. Or what if you could treat pain without taking drugs? What if you could actually heal the body from the inside out rather than the outside in by using the mind as the greatest medicine you could ever have? And instead of taking the opiates, which are really toxic and a long-term addictive for the body, they're completely replaced by going into a virtual world. Or what if further than that, you could actually treat people who have phobias and find that you can actually cure them, or PTSD using virtual reality? Or what if you could go into a virtual forest and become a tree, and your friend could become a bird, and another friend become an earthworm, and you could begin to understand how a tree really works, the importance of sunlight, the importance of moisture, and the importance of the ecology of the whole environment and how all the different species work together. Or what if you could stand on that plain, that field in Africa, waiting for a food drop? You and your villagers are starving, and you're there to watch them as they're waiting for the airplane to fly over and drop food to them. And you're there, you see their faces, you're there, and you'll always remember it. Or what if you could actually become a refugee? You could be in a refugee camp and see what it's like to be a person who has no country, and especially be with people who are former professionals and now they're living in a tent, starving with all of their compatriots. Or what if you could actually be anywhere in the world and interact with people in 3D, learning together, playing together, visiting together? That's sort of what we're doing right now, only we can do it in 3D. Or what if you had a magic book where you're reading a story about Cinderella and you decide, wow, this is so cool, I wish I could go there. So you put on your glasses, your augmented reality glasses, and you see Cinderella's castle pop out of the book. And then you're looking at that book, it's sort of registered with the book, and you're looking around, you're looking at the windows, and you say, wow, there's some people in there. I want to go. So you flip a switch, and then you go in the castle, and you wander around inside, and you try to rescue a princess, or you try to discover a treasure in there. Or there's some other puzzles that you have to solve within that. That's the magic book that sweeps us from reality to virtuality and back again. And also when you open the book, there's a Japanese princess there. You see Mark visiting with that Japanese princess. Or what if you could make an atom and learn electron orbitals this way in your high school chemistry class? And it's very difficult to understand these concepts, these abstract concepts. But what if you could actually build the atom and see how the electron orbits work and understand the importance of electron spin and the energy levels that put them in the various orbitals and how those orbitals with the valence electrons share to form molecules? Or what if you can actually have a kingdoms you go into to learn principles like the Pythagorean theorem, and that when you go into this kingdom, you have an owl, that's called the owl Archimedes, that lands on your shoulder. And Archimedes guides you into this world so that you actually try to solve problems by rescuing people who are in a burning house and learning that you can use mathematical principles to determine how long the ladder needs to be. Or what if you could be a middle school student, 11, 12 years old, and actually build virtual worlds to teach STEM subjects to other 11, 12-year-old students, teaching them about gravity, light, momentum, and scale. I want you to see this picture close up. Have you ever been to a classroom where you could do this? Or what if you could scan images instead of having a screen, having a newspaper, having any kind of medium? It's you scan the bits with basically quanta of light directly on the retina of the eye. So there is no screen. The screen is the retina of the eye. Well, guess what? You can do all this. As a matter of fact, most of it's been done. And much, much more with what we're talking about, virtual and augmented reality. Think of what that does to vision. Now, what is virtual reality? You guys know this very well. It's actually a term from optical physics. And we use virtual all the time, but it originated from the notion of virtual images. Virtual images that appear to be located in one place in space, but are not really there. You have the real mountains going up and the virtual mountains going down. And in the military, we were accessing this in order to build cockpits and head-up displays and head-mounted displays I'll mention to you later on. Well, but we all interact with these virtual images all the time when we stand in front of the mirror. There's another person standing on the other side of that piece of glass. It looks sort of like you, but doesn't really look like you, because that's a mirror image of you. That's not how you appear. You're actually switched. So that's a virtual image that you're seeing. So where did VR come from? Well, I have my own story about that, because I was there at the beginning, along with some other guys. But my whole job was, my first job as an undergraduate student in electrical engineering was I was commissioned in the Air Force. This is during the Vietnam War period, and I was going to go into the military regardless. And so my first job I called sharpening the sword. And so I ended up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and my job was to determine how to couple one human, a pilot, fighter pilot, to enormous complexity. And this machine that delivers energy from one place to another. And so basically the workstation I was dealing with looked something like this. We have 300 switches and 75 displays, 11 switches on the control stick and 9 switches on the throttle. And you're flying at twice the speed of sound and pulling G's to the boundaries of consciousness and being shot at the same time. A very busy workplace. That was my job. I was a flight test engineer when I began. I flew in the fighters and I tested equipment. I know what it's like. And it is so complex. And it's too complex. As a matter of fact, that causes problems. So I started working on solutions to a number of these problems of how do you aim, you have to aim the aircraft in order to aim the systems in the airplane. How do you display all this information, especially when you have imaging coming in from multi-level television, forward-looking infrared sensors. So I started working on virtual interfaces. Here you see Lieutenant Furness on the left wearing the very first helmet-mounted display. It was a monocular system, used a miniature cathode ray tube located on the side of the helmet, relayed the image up with optics, magnifying and collimating that image so that you see it at optical infinity. A 30-degree field of view image. Now, you never get an image that size in the cockpit as a real display because there's just not enough space there. And then you see on the right, Lieutenant Furness wearing the first helmet-mounted sight, helmet tracking system. So we knew exactly where the head is located within the cockpit so that you can look through that pellicle in the front and aim, see that pipper that you put over a target and then measure the angle to that target from the airplane. And then, of course, what I did is put the two together. So we now had a big picture and we always knew where it was located. And that became virtual reality. Now, fast forwarding, you see the dates there from 60, I started on this in 66, and 67 on, I've worked continuously on virtual and augmented reality and their applications. Fast forward about 20 years or so, 18 years, I started working on what we call a super cockpit. A super cockpit is a cockpit that you wear. You put on a magic helmet, a magic flight suit, magic gloves. You're attached to these amazing computers. This is, look at it, it's 86. And basically we're using devices that actually project through holographic lenses, scans into the eyes, using speech input, using eye tracking, binaural sound, tactile displays in the glove, tracking hand position and things like that. And so this was a project that I was doing in the mid-80s. But prior to that, I'd actually built a simulator, the Darth Vader simulator in 1981, where we're testing these concepts of virtual cockpits. And here you see the Darth Vader helmet, is really called the Visual Coupled Airborne System Simulator, where we generate a 120-degree field of view by 80-degree field of view, binocular, tracked with a 16-bit electromagnetic tracking system, hooked to display electronics that was water-cooled, and 8 VAX computers and 1 Evans Sutherland picture system to draw the left eye and 1 Evans Sutherland picture system to draw the right eye. And this is in 1981. We're doing this and proving what the concept was going to be like. And so let me tell you the story about the day I put this on for the first time. So I'm in my laboratory, in the simulator, and the guys said, we're ready to do it. This would be the first time that all the pieces are going to work together. And so there's this gigantic helmet that weighs 10 pounds. It has a negator spring assembly, which actually reduces the rotational weight because most of the weight is concentrated at the front. So we put a negator spring to keep you from weighting down. You still felt the total weight on your head, but that was the way that we were going to reduce the effect of having that front loading on it. And so here I was sitting there in the dark, and I said, let's go for it, guys. So we switched it on. And of course, they'd been playing with this before. This wasn't the first time it was all switched on. This is the first time it was switched on for me. And then what opens to me is this panoramic picture. It's like sitting on the front row of an IMAX theater, only now you can look around. And something happened at that point. It was one of those epiphanies. I about crapped in my pants because this thing was so remarkable. And then as I started looking around, I began to think, oh my goodness, what is this? What have we done? And what are the implications of this, what eventually be called virtual reality? So in the application for the and the fighter cockpits, what I was trying to do is simulate how we can use a virtual cockpit to replace all of this. So the idea was to convert that into something like this, that this is what the pilot would see flying at night at low altitude and high speed. Now, as it turns out, this was demonstrated and flown by test pilots and things like that in the laboratory. And pretty much what we did was a fusion of all the information that came from the sensors in our aircraft. Our digital fly-by-wire, our stability augmentation, our air data, our fire control system, navigate, all these things that were all fused together to paint this picture became a gestalt and what the pilot could see instantaneously by looking around at night where they can't really see the real world. This is actually a replacement for the real world, and they could see through this. So it was a combination of virtual reality and augmented reality. To us, there wasn't any difference. It was just a continuum because we could change the transmittance of the visor. We could go all the way from VR to AR and back again. So fast forward again to just recently, and you have the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. You see the helmet that the guy wears. So pretty much I was working on that, the foundation of that back in the 80s to get that to happen. So moving along to my second job. Now this was an interesting transition. As a result of a call I got from a general in the Pentagon, the general asked if I'd do a press release and a press conference of what I was doing with this virtual cockpit stuff. And this is sort of in an 85 time period, 84, 85, 86 time period. And I said, okay, sure. It's, you know, it's classified. He said, I know, but just declassified. And so network television comes in to do a program. And I end up on the CBS Evening News and become an instant star, television star. And then all the network television had to come, even Australia, New Zealand television and BBC came to film this thing. Science editor to the New York Times came down and spent a day with me talking about what are the implications of this technology beyond the military. And and as a result of that, I started getting telephone calls, and these phone calls were coming from people just completely orthogonal to what I was doing. One of the first calls I got was a mother that called me and said, I saw this program on television and my child has cerebral palsy. Is there anything you can do with this technology to help my child? And then several surgeons called me. One of them is a thoracic surgeon. He says, I'm inside this patient up to my elbows trying to do a graft of the aorta. And the problem is my navigation system is a CT scan. It's on a light box on the wall. And I have to look over to see this and try to translate in my mind what's going on inside the patient. Another surgeon said, I want to be inside the patient looking out. I want to do a minimally invasive surgical procedure to put my eyes inside. Can you do that for me? Anesthesiologists are saying, hey, could you build us a super cockpit for the anesthesiologist? Because it's crazy what goes on in an operating room. All of these different warning systems are going on, all the complexity of the equipment we have mixed and matched. It's just very difficult to keep track of what's going on. Firefighting company came and said, we have this real problem with firefighters. They're going in these buildings. Their buildings are full of smoke. We don't know if there are any people in there. We don't know if the firefighters don't know if there are any other firefighters around them. And the fire chief who's directing all of this has a radio and standing outside the building and doesn't know anything. Is there any way you can give us a cockpit that we can take with us to show us the way around, see through the smoke, see if there are other people there, and help us substantially determine where the fire is and put it out? So anyhow, I was getting 3 or 4 phone calls a week from people that had watched television programs or read some of my articles I wrote in Popular Mechanics and magazines like that. So that's when I began to realize, you know, this is transformative. Virtual reality and augmented reality, we didn't necessarily call it that at the time, is transformative because what it does is put something inside of us we wouldn't get through any other medium. And it awakens our spatial memory. And so I decided to, with the permission of my leadership, to take a sabbatical. And with full pay and a travel budget, and I traveled just about everywhere, talking to aerospace companies, computer companies, toy companies, kindergartens, hospitals, you name it, and realized, and this was in 1987, 86, 87, that we're getting ready for a revolution in computing technology. Because I could get into places wearing my Department of Defense badge that I wouldn't get into otherwise, the secret stuff. There was going to be an explosion. We didn't even have mini computer. We didn't have rather microprocessors at that time. We didn't really have the internet at that time to speak of. So there was going to be this revolution, telecommunications, everything. But no one was working on the interface. So I decided we really need to get this out of the military, this virtual reality thing. And so I just put together a plan to start up a lab somewhere in a university. And the University of Washington made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So in 1989, I moved to the University of Washington with the idea of beating my sword into a plowshare and to taking this technology that was developed by the military, but to use it for medicine, education, design, all of these other things. So I was given space in Fluke Hall, F-L-U-K-E. That's sort of an unfortunate name, but that was the name of the company that made electronic instruments that dedicated the money for this building, and started the Human Interface Technology Lab in 1989. And then things took off with patents, the virtual vision display, the first consumer virtual display in 1994. And then in 1996, you see the virtual retinal display I mentioned to you, an optical bench where we proved that you could scan an image directly on the retina of the eye and that didn't require screens anymore. And then this guy shows up, Billinghurst, one of my students, actually shows up a lot earlier than this, 10 years before this. And, but we formed the first augmented reality company, AR2 Works, based upon his invention with Hiro Kato of the AR toolkit. And so you guys know all about that, about augmented reality and where that came from. And so we started putting it to work. We did a connection with Japan, where we had 2 people in Seattle and 2 people in Japan through 4 ISD and dial-up lines be in the same virtual space in 3D at the same time. And then we built the Starship in 98. And we did, using my virtual vision display, we got into pain and discovered that by accident, how we can use virtual reality as a non-pharma analgesic for pain. And then on and on and on, working on schools and how kids could use virtual reality as a tool for learning. And this Greenspace thing that we did, again, Mark was there for this, where we basically, when you put on the headset in Seattle, you were transported to a Japanese cottage. You looked out the window and saw Mount Fuji. When you're in Seattle, you put on, when you're in Japan, you put on your headset, you're translated to a log cabin and you look out the window and see Mount Rainier. And then you play a game. We did this for 4 days. It cost us $30,000 telephone bill to do that across the Pacific. But we proved that what we could do in terms of connecting minds and hands and ourselves across this space. So over this 4-day period, 350 people visited in that space in Japan and in Seattle. So as you go through this whole tour Lots of interesting things have happened. There was a little interruption there, and with 2012 and a little beyond, Palmer Luckey shows up on the scene. Palmer Luckey just used the stuff we developed 30 years before, but the time was right. And that's where we see the modern technology today, all based upon the original work that we did prior to that. So when you look at the stats of what happened in the HIT lab, we actually grew from one person to about 110, about $40 million of funding we brought in, equipment. We had 8 times the university's average in terms of patents. We had a consortium of 50 companies that pledged $50,000 a year, equivalent to basically be a part of this whole activity. Lots of graduates. We spun off 27 companies, 20 of which are still active. And many, many times the 500 people that are employed in those. I don't know what it is now. It's in the thousands. And those market cap of those companies are now about $12, $13 billion. And oh, by the way, this was done by a lab that had departments, students, grad students primarily, from departments all over the campus. And they lived in the HIT lab. Mark was there with them. Pretty much all of the engineering except chemical engineering. We had bio, electrical, mechanical, industrial, computer science and engineering, civil and environmental engineering. We also had art, drama, and music, and oceans and fisheries, the medical school, dental school, nursing school, psychology, geography, and the College of Architecture and Urban Planning. And these students came and lived there. And with the funding from the Virtual Worlds Consortium, what we did is seed these groups. I'd organize the students into clusters of 4. And in those clusters, you may have a electrical engineering student, psychology, oceans and fisheries, and drama. Now, these were like the blind men around the elephant because they didn't even know how to speak the same language. But get 3 or 4 inventions a week from them because they see the problem from different perspectives. So let's go back to this guy, this Billinghurst guy. Looks a little different then than he does now, right? We ought to do a side-by-side comparison, Mark. You notice he has all that hair, and he has that nice lush hair and beard and everything, but you also see those circles under his eyes. That's because the guy never slept. I don't know how he did it. So anyhow, he was my PhD student in electrical engineering. And he did, just so you guys know, in order to get his PhD, he did about 9 master's degrees because he was so excited about doing these different projects that he'd take off in one direction and do it, and then he'd take off in another, and he'd stumble over something, get excited about something else. And so I had Mark, in the end, just take what you've done and let's put it together in some kind of synthesis of everything. That was his dissertation. He probably doesn't see it that way, but that's what it was. But something happened while he was sort of in that transition period of finishing up. I get this visitor. Now, I've been to New Zealand before when I was working for the Air Force. I was part of the Air Standardization Coordination Committee where we're trying to get the standardization of cockpits of military aircraft around the world so that we can interoperate. Well, with the U.S. Air Force, Canadian Air Forces, the RAF in the UK, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and the Royal Australian Air Force. And so we were interacting with each other how to do this. At that time, when I first went to New Zealand, I think New Zealand had 12 airplanes, 12 fighter airplanes. I don't think you have any now, but you had 12 of them at the time. Had a bunch of helicopters and transport aircraft. But it was so fun. And I fell in love with New Zealand during that time. Well, what happened is it turns out that Seattle and Christchurch are sister cities. And a delegation comes up from New Zealand, from Christchurch, and they want to interact with the university and included the mayor and some other people. And from Jade Software and from the university. And so anyhow, Canterbury Development Corporation. So this guy you see in front of you there is Larry Podmore. He was from the Canterbury Development Corporation. He ended up in my laboratory during this visit. They were vectored by the dean's office to the lab. They'd sort of heard of the lab before, and so they wanted to come and see what it's all about. And I talked to them about what we're doing, the companies we're spinning off, virtual reality stuff, introduced them to Mark, and who was a Kiwi and was nearing graduation. And Podmore said, wow, this is really cool. Do you think we could do something like this in New Zealand? And I said, I thought, if I play this right, I'm going to get a free trip to New Zealand. I said, well, I don't know. Maybe I ought to come down and take a look. Oh, would you come down and take a look? Bring your wife down. We'll fly you down business class. And, you can spend some time, looking around and things like that. And I said, okay. So, and this was back in 99, 98, something like that. Anyhow. So my wife and I went to New Zealand and we had a great time. We drove all around the South Island. And then finally, they said, well, Canterbury Development Corporation said, why don't we show you around town and some of the projects that are going on? And I thought, okay, well, so the vacation's over. And so I followed them around and I was blown away. This was so cool. The Trimble people, the stuff that was going on in the guys that were doing the the graphic information system stuff. AR, what were they, Mark? Anyhow.
Yeah, there was the fast scan guys that doing the scanning.
Yes, those guys. Yeah. And then Tate Electronics, all these guys. So anyhow, and Jade, and so I said, hey, this is a class act, and so at the end of my visit, they said, well, what do you think? And I said, I think there's some real possibilities here. Maybe I should come back. I have a sabbatical coming up and spend an extended period of time here. And they said, oh yeah, come on, we'll get you set up with an Erskine fellowship. And you can spend however long you can. So I came back and spent 6 months. And during that time, I met with the prime minister, deputy prime minister, all of the ministers pretty much. And they said, we want to do this. We wanted to start this kind of lab in Christchurch, the HIT Lab New Zealand. And so then it happened. But we needed a director. So here was Mark Billinghurst, a native son. And so I twisted Mark's arm a little bit and said, hey, Mark, wouldn't you like to go back to New Zealand? No, by the way, there's a lab down there for you to run, the startup. So I think he said, well, okay, I'll give it a go. And of course, that ended up beginning his journey in New Zealand, then into Australia, and then back to New Zealand again, and Australia at the same time. So, and he's a hero. He's my hero. And really amazed what he's been able to accomplish. So it happened. I had to learn Maori. I had to go through this potpourri to open the lab, and it was quite a celebration. Got a dose of culture, and then of course I met the All Blacks and the Crusaders, and got to know those guys. Well, we went to all the rugby matches. We became addicted to rugby. My wife particularly liked all those guys running around in shorts. And we had this big picture of Dan Carter in his skivvies on our kitchen room door. That she thought that this was good stuff. Anyhow, after all of that, and putting this all together, I've been working on this stuff for 54 years, and it's been quite a ride. And this is sort of what's happened. What's really made it successful is the students, the best students worldwide. And this whole idea, if we mix it, it's a mixture. You're not all one, you don't have one perspective. and good leadership, connection with industry, all these kind of things. This is what made the HIT Lab a success. Here, by the way, is a photo. This is actually taken in the mayor's office, Gary Moore, when he was mayor of Christchurch, New Zealand, with Roy Sharp next to him on the, he is on the right, next to the right, and John Huntsman from the University of Washington, and Chris Pickrell, who was at that time the executive director of the Canterbury Development Corporation. And they signed the agreement that married the University of Washington with the University of Canterbury to do this HIT Lab. So the home was in the old Mass building, which has now been torn down and now is a new building. But looking back at those 54 years, these are things that I can say were all about the success. We experienced wonder in an unprecedented way, because VR and AR, for that matter, is a wonder generator, where you experience things you never be able to experience otherwise. You can be present in any place, anytime, and you never forget it, because what VR does is put a place inside of you by putting you in a place. You can now change perspective, enlarge that vision by looking through others' eyes. This is the best way we can move minds. We found that you can rapidly simulate complex information and create worlds that have no limitation, really. Computation is going to get better. The hardware devices are going to get better. The software is going to get better. We're in a position with this technology to amplify intelligence and include artificial intelligence in it. And the bottom line, it is so fun to be doing this. But there's a need for a virtual world society, because what's happening is we've split the atom and unleashed an enormous amount of energy. And when you put that headset on, you're writing on the brain with permanent ink. It's never going to go away. We awaken spatial memory. So we have to understand the power of immersion that we have unleashed here and use it responsibly. Now, what is the environment in which we want to use it? Well, let me tell you, we're in a time when the earth is suffering. We know why. I mean, for example, we've just opened up the Arctic wilderness for oil drilling, so we can pump stuff out of the earth, destroying the natural environment, so we can create petrol to go into our automobiles, so we can sit still with our idle engines running in gridlock traffic. So is it worth it? And also all of the energy it takes to refine it and transport it, and all the animals that get killed in the process, and for that matter, people. Look at this, the long goodbye with AIDS in Africa. The return of the fallen. War is really dumb. These young people are in these boxes, cannot live out their lives. They're separated from their families forever, just because of a few people making decisions. My mother, who died a few years ago, she died at 93 years old. The last years of her life were not very good, and they could have been a lot better. The largest growing population segment in the Western world are the people 80 years old and above. And by the way, I'm close to being there myself. I'm 77 at the moment. And then my grandchildren, what kind of world are they going to inherit that I'm giving to them? Humanity is suffering. We're suffering with poverty and hunger. You'd think at this point in time, with all the technology we'd have, we could solve those problems. Of course, a lot of these are geopolitical problems. But this is the world in which we are living, and where we have all this high technology. And what are we doing about it? And then, of course, you see what's going on with the technology. Here we have this lad on the left at school. He's bored to tears, having to sit in a chair, watch the teacher talk, and can't wait to get home to play Grand Theft Auto. And then when you get home, where are the other family members? They're into their screens. Because everyone, now you look at all the technology that we have in the homes, and it's mesmerizing. Now, the problem is we still have blinders on. We still don't see the elephant together. We're all marching to different drummers, perhaps. So what do? What do we do to navigate what's happening in the world? What is our compass? What is our map? What is our sextant? We can't even see to shoot the stars or to shoot the sun in the horizon because we can't see it, because we're in such a high sea state. You can't see the horizon. How in the world are we ever going to navigate out of this when our traditional methods really don't work anymore? Well, we have to have a new kind of navigation system. We have to have a nextant, which is the next sextant. And what that is actually navigating with our heart and extending our vision so that we can see the whole elephant and see it together and work on it. What if we could take off the blindfolds and this elephant was like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Well, the way we'd have to take out those blindfolds is to add light in darkness. We got to light the fire, to provide the light so that we can see. And so we can see the whole, and then light more lights, and then more lights, and then more lights, and then eventually focus that light where we can do something with it. And that's what the virtual world society is all about. Here I've been working on this technology for so long, I realize it has so much power to change and lift humanity. We need to start doing something about it. This is our logo of an adult holding up a child in the backdrop of technology and virtual worlds that can help us have this stoking and igniting our imagination and our creativity. And the adult is holding up the child and saying, what do you see? And you notice the child is facing toward the future. The adult is facing toward the past. But it takes both to do it. Well, a mission of the Virtual World Society is the awakened minds and the link hearts. And what we want to do is become this conscience and heart of VR by bringing together communities. The communities of the technology providers, of the independent developers, of schools, of families, in order to work on problems that are out there in the world, in our local community and in the world. And so we want to create this lens that does that. And this lens has free ships that are sailing into it from this outside world of these individual lights, which includes you guys. And they're the ships that come with people, the membership. They're the ships that come with sponsors or the food to basically keep this alive. And there's the ship that comes with partners who won't, with their own organizations, work on this. And then that goes into a ring of research, innovation, and training to where we sort out really how do we apply this light into the clusters of experience generation, of models, new models for reimagining education, especially in the home, and role models and mentors. And then, of course, the center of that is all focused on families and individuals and their activities at home, at school, and at work. And so we're trying to take the light and gather it, aggregate it, focus it to where we can accomplish something. And one of the biggest things is getting kids to fall in love with learning after they get out of kindergarten. Because what happens is schools, instead of inflaming kids, they actually put out a lot of the light. because you put 20, 30 kids in a classroom and have them go through the standardized testing and curriculum. It puts out a lot of the light that they have and a lot of the things, exciting things that they want to become. So the learning living room is one big piece of this. Also, how can we help people who are isolated and people who are sick? We're doing a lot of work with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, where we're creating wishes for kids who are terminally ill, who are very sick. This is Price. We just did a wish for him. He was able to slay dragons, virtual dragons in VR, to save Seattle from this bad guy that was trying to drain all of our natural resources and melt Mount Rainier. And we did that at the top of the Space Needle, and he did it. He said this was the greatest day in his life. What that gives him courage, because is going to have to go through a heart transplant here shortly. So those are the kind of things we're trying to do. We want to become this combination of the Peace Corps of VR, where we're on the ground with boots running to help people, bringing the technology in if it's needed. But nevertheless, how do we ignite that fire and keep it burning? The National Geographic Society. National Geographic brings the outside world to inside of us. What we want to do is the opposite. We want to take the stuff that's inside of us and bring it out to the rest of the world. And so forth with these models. Our goal is to have 10 million families become subscribers to the Virtual World Society for $100 a year. That gives us $1 billion a year to work with, to actually fund these activities, like what's going on in your lab, like what's going on with these indie developers, and with other projects that are in the home, where we provide worlds, we provide mentors, and we provide connectivity to other families around the world. Now let me finish. I've maybe gone over a little time here. Sorry about that, Pi. With the frog story, virtual frogs. So this is one of my favorite stories. Not long after I arrived in Seattle, I was invited by a bunch of fourth graders to come up to their school, an elementary school in North Seattle, and because they wanted to have lunch with me and talk about virtual reality. They said, "Would you come?" I said, "Oh yeah, sure. This will be fun." So I went there to the school. We were in the cafeteria at lunchtime, and there were these about 10 kids gathered around this big round table. And they said, "We're so glad you came because we're going to talk to you about virtual reality." And I said, "Okay, sure. Let's talk about virtual reality. I'm glad I could be here." And they said, "Well, we think there should be virtual frogs." And I said, "Really? Virtual frogs? Okay, well, yeah. Why virtual frogs?" Well, you see, because we're all concerned. We've been talking about this. We're all concerned about those 9th graders and 10th graders around the country that are dissecting real frogs to see what's on the inside of them. And you have to kill the frogs in order to see what's inside of them and learn. And that's just not right. What we want to do is create virtual frogs, and then you can dissect them all you want to, and you don't have to kill any real frogs. Plus the fact, what we'd like to do is shrink ourselves to 1 inch high and get a frog's eye view of the world. And then we want to shrink ourselves to 1 millimeter and grow inside the frog. We want to crawl up, go through the mouth, go down through the station tube into the stomach, and then all come out at the other end. And I'm thinking, good grief, these are better ideas than my graduate students. And so I said, well, yeah, you could do that. You could do all of that. But you know, you're going to have to build the worlds. Who's going to construct the graphics and the worlds that you're going to use in VR? And this one little 4th grader across the table looked at me indignantly and said, well, we are. We're the only ones that have any imagination. Guess what? They're doing it now. They're doing it. So let me encourage you to, every one of you should be a member of the Virtual World Society. Mark Billinghurst is on the board of directors of the Virtual World Society, and really one of the beginning founders of the thing. And it's free. find out what's going on, join the community, be in that ship that's sailing into this lens, let us focus it. Because what we want to do is we want to light all these fires. This little quote by George Bernard Shaw, playwright, said, "Life is no brief candle for me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I have got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." And that's why I'm giving this talk, because I'm handing it to you to take over and to get this working so we can lift humanity. Okay, that's it. Sorry for the long-winded talk. You can tell I'm passionate about this. So open for questions now. Let me turn this off. I share screen. That's off now.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Tom, for the amazing presentation. It was really eye-opening to have a look at the first-hand experience of someone who tried VR headsets, before most of us were actually born. So that was really nice to see. So yeah, we are now open to questions. If anyone has any, just raise your arm in the participant list and I'll unmute you to ask a question. Otherwise, you could just type it down in the chat box and I'll read out the question. So please do ask many questions because it's not every day you get to speak with someone who tried, who actually was part of the development of VR during the 60s. Maybe I'll start first. So I think in your slide, Tom, you showed that one of the first experiences was when you were an electrical engineer in the military, I believe. I think as a lieutenant, was it? I was just wondering, so for us nowadays, it's easy to say AR, VR, and everybody knows what it is because we all try it out. But back then, I suppose the term was not used yet, AR and VR. So how exactly were you first inspired to build that headset for did they just come to you and say we wanted a headset they could
No.
do? Yeah, how was it pitched?
Well, I mean, my job was, I was working in a laboratory that was responsible for designing advanced cockpits. And we had several big problems that were facing us. One was that here you had this big machine, it was flying really fast, and you had to aim the whole machine, to aim the systems on the machine. With the exception of the radar would scan, and you could, you had some of the missile seekers that could look off bore sight and things like that. But pretty much to aim to begin with, you had to aim the whole airplane. When in fact, the pilot could see the target. They could see the target off bore sight or see a point on the ground, but having to move that whole airplane over there to do that was just not very efficient. So I was trying to solve that problem. How do we come up with that? How do we figure out a way to measure where the pilot's looking and input that into the system so things can be taken care of automatically? Missile seekers could go that line of sight, radar antennas to that line of sight, things like that. So it was trying to solve problems, the head tracking problem. And then we had this problem with here we are flying at night. We're having to use sensors to see the ground at low altitude and high speed. And we had these forward-link infrared sensors. We're looking in the infrared spectrum. We also had low light level television that would amplify the existing light there. But the problem is, how do you display it? So you have this high resolution sensor that can see at night, but there are all these instruments in the cockpit and there's no place to put the display. There's this little hole you can put a 4-inch display there. And the pilots are scrunched up here trying to see in that display while they're flying along to find these targets. And I'm saying, hey, we got to come up with a better way for this. What if we put the display actually on your helmet and we magnified it and displayed it so you saw a big picture, a virtual image instead of the real image. And that way you fill up the whole cockpit. And oh, by the way, you can move your head around too. And the idea at that time, you did it in one eye, so you see the outside world with one eye and you see the display world in the other eye. That went away after a while, but nevertheless, that was the idea. And then we said, wait a minute, we could actually put those two together and we can have a helmet that has the display that moves around. And with the head tracking, we know exactly where the display is. So we can take all the instruments in the cockpit and display it and overlay it over the world. And so we call this visually coupled systems. That was our first term. That was the original name before Jaron Lanier came along many years later. and gave the term virtual reality. And then, and of course, as I mentioned before, we didn't even think about a difference between virtual reality and augmented reality or mixed reality or anything like that. It was all just one thing because we changed the transparency. And that changed, of course, what you did with it. So that's sort of the background. It was all to solve problems. We didn't, and so it was in the process of solving problems that we had these epiphanies of other things you could do by putting the pieces together to form this.
I see. Yeah, it still blows my mind sometimes to think that these are things that we take for granted in our headsets, but it was a major problem 50 years ago. It's just to get head tracking down, and it was a big deal.
Oh, it
back then.
was,
So,
and
yeah.
we were using infrared tracking system. We had two lead sulfide photodiodes on either side of the helmet, and we had a scanning device that's on the canopy rail that sent these fans of light, and then would sweep through the cockpit, and we just look at the timing signals coming from those four photodiodes. It's like the Vive.
Little
It's
lighthouses.
exactly like the Vive. Yeah, the lighthouse. It's exactly what they're doing now is a lighthouse in the Vive. What we're doing.
Nice.
And we did ultrasound, we did electromagnetic, we did all kinds of different approaches for doing this to find out what's better. And one of the things we found out with ultrasound is that the speed of sound changes depending upon your cabin altitude. So depending on the altitude that's in the cabin, of course, the speed of sound changes. So you had to change all of this. You had to compensate for the change in the speed of sound because that's the way we're triangulating on the helmet. We had, sound generators and then microphones in the helmet and things like that. Yeah, we had all kinds of wizardry to track head position and eye position. We're using paraboloids in the visor. We're tracking eye position and summing that with head position, speech input, binaural sound. You got it. That was there.
All right, so we have another question from Tamil in the chat, so I'll just read it out. What was the constraints or challenges you faced during that time in VR? Do you think the problems are solved now, or are they still being a constraint in current systems? So whatever constraints or challenges that you face during your history of in the VR space, I think he's asking, are the issues that you think were prevalent in the past solved now, or do you think it's still the same until now? Maybe like, for example, small field of view.
Well, that's a great question. And as a matter of fact, we are making good progress, I think. The biggest problem we had, most daunting problem we had was really latency to begin with, because we were trying to keep up with head movement and with eye movement. And of course, the computational capability, we didn't have graphic signal processors. We didn't have those ability we didn't have any NVIDIA kind of thing at the time. So it was just raw computation that had to do this vector graphics or raster graphics around. And that was a problem that made people sick, because you move your head and then, then a fraction of a second later, the scene would follow. So that problem basically has been solved, I think. It's not, not 100%, but it's getting close. We don't have much of a problem with latency. Now, we do have other problems, one of which is, and a big problem, is that most of the headsets we use, like the Vive and the Quest and the Oculus Rift and all these Valve Index, all of these basically are using collimating optics looking at a screen. So you're starting off with a two-dimensional screen that, of course, is arrayed with pixels. And then what you're doing is putting optics in front of those to magnify and collimate it. So that makes the pixels appear to be at optical infinity. So you can have something up close, but it appears to be far away. Now, you say, well, that's all well and good. Yeah, it looks great. But you're also generating 3D cues between the two eyes, using the divergence cues of the two eyes, binocular cues. But you aren't changing basically the divergence of the beam going to the eye accordingly. So as a pixel would originate, or how an object would originate out in the distance, all the light rays coming in would be parallel. But if you're giving a binocular cue that's up close, they're going to be diverging. So the accommodation response is all wrong. So here we are wearing these glasses, these goggles, that are not the way our visual system works. So that's a problem we haven't solved yet. Now, with the virtual retinal display, which is the scanning the image directly on the eye, one of the reasons I invented that was to help solve this problem, because we're using lasers. We're using a coherent monochromatic light, RGB, to scan on the retina, very low energy. But since it's coherent light, we can actually change it on the fly so it has a different light wavefront as a function of the origin of each pixel. So that's the reason I did that. And of course, that was invented back in the mid-90s, and the patent's already expired on it. And as that was really going to be the original system that was used by Magic Leap. And then they found out they couldn't make it, at least at the cost point they needed to. So that's one problem that isn't solved. Now, there's some that are in between. Certainly, having to wear something on your head to get VR is not particularly wonderful. People don't like to wear things. And but if the weight gets down to where it's almost like you don't have anything on, or you can create another way. And by the way, my personal panoramic display does that. This is actually taking the display off your head, but you still have basically a virtual retinal display that scans the light. So there are ergonomics issues. There are still motion issues. There's how do you there's not enough wide field of view. We're only about 100 degrees, which is the maximum. Actually, it's less than that. Usually it's 100 degrees field of view, when in fact, our vision system is 220 and beyond. So we're not even getting but to half of our field of view. It's good enough to do some things, but presence is going to be affected by going on out to the far periphery. And I have a grant in National Science Foundation working on that whole thing now. What's going on out to far periphery? And we see that there's a direct connection to the involuntary nervous system and to the limbic system. And this is where we get into subconscious by inputting things in the far periphery. Anyhow, that's another story. So yeah, good progress being made, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have another question from Aladdin, and I was also thinking about the same thing actually. He asked, how do we help humanity and reduce world hunger and poverty with VR? Or in other words, how do we actually find purpose and meaning in AR, VR? So what do you think about that, Tom?
Okay, really good question. Of course, that's what I was leaning toward in this whole virtual world society thing. You know, let's face it, the whole idea of helping suffering humanity is that it's not just by providing food. And it's the whole adage of if you give a man a fish a day, you'll save him for a day. You teach him how to fish, and he'll have a lifetime of food. But he also has to have a fishing pole. And so the question is, how do you get access? How do you give access to these environments where they can be learned? And so that has to happen, starting with what people do have, but giving them a skill set. The end game is getting a job or having a function where you can provide food for your family. And that may be, how do you grow it? How do you use what's in your environment to get that food? And maybe your creation, your creative outlet isn't going to be making virtual worlds. It may be just actually figuring out a way for people around you to grow vegetables, or to use a paintbrush on a real piece of paper to make art. So we're starting at the high end, you know, and just pushing technology down to the low end isn't necessarily the solution. But It is a way to lift, and especially if you have a chance to plant some seeds. One of the things that's going on this month and at the end of last month is the so-called Younga Conference. This is the youth takeover of the United Nations General Assembly. And these are delegates from 150 companies, youth delegates, who are meeting to learn different skills and to learn about from each other about what's going on in the world with these sustainable development goals in mind. And they're coming from places where that's all happening. And so one of the things that has emerged from this is that from the people that are the organizers, and they say, okay, we're going to have this conference, but then they're going to go home, and what are they going to have to follow them so that they can take this and help their local communities around the world? And they're looking to the Virtual World Society to say, can these people become ambassadors and be the starting point of those homes where you basically provide them with access and they become a center point for their community? And then once there's a will, there's a way. That when excitement happens and it gets up to the top, there are those decision makers at the top that can do something. And so it's starting a movement. And you're not going to get a lot of these governments to pay attention to it unless there's a groundswell from the bottom up, I believe. And so that's another avenue of using the United Nations as a segue to start these little lights. It's like lighting candles in all of these different countries. And then those candles lighting other candles to where you get now a movement underway. I'm convinced that with $1 billion a year, you could change the world with this by planting these seeds, lighting these candles, getting the movement underway. Because people need hope. That's the thing it's missing. And to see that they can do it, and that they certainly have the intelligence to do it. They may not have the access or the education to do it, but that can come. And there are people that are in well-lighted places who are willing to mentor that. It's unbelievable what's happening. We're doing a project with the Black Technology Mentorship Program. These are the problem we have, of course, in the U.S. is that we have a lot of racial problems. And one of the reasons we have it is because of economic conditions. And now these companies are waking up to that and say, well, I can hire 50 Black engineers. And they go ask the other Black engineers, where do we go to get them? And they say, there aren't any. You've got to grow your own. You've got to start at the beginning and grow your own. And by the way, you give them internships. You give them these mentorships. You give them the opportunities to learn and grow. And then there you have your workforce of the future. So a lot of this doesn't have anything to do with technology. It has to do with just what we use, what we have already. And the biggest thing is mentoring. And the second biggest thing is to be able to connect people together. And the third thing is to deliver these worlds of wonder where you can learn way time faster than you can using traditional educational tools.
Great. I think we have one last question here by Kunal. So he says, he asked, with the rapid growth in computation and technology, how do you envision the future of AR/VR? As in, what's your perspective on the mass adaptation of consumer AR/VR tech and its application in general?
Well, currently we of course have a really small install base. You know, we get so excited about this, but then we look around and most people don't even know what it is, and much less have any desire or capability of getting it. So we are the sort of the early adopters. We're the ones that are on the edge. Now, what will happen? Of course, the march of technology is going to continue. The biggest problem we have right now, in terms of adoption, is what are people going to do with it? And a lot of people, most people see it as just a toy to play games with. And of course, we see it much different than that. This is really a way to move minds in a way, unprecedented way. And so the bottleneck is how we go about creating content. This is just a delivery mechanism for content. just like a TV is a delivery uh, mechanism for content. If the content isn't any good, the TV is worthless. And so the same is true with VR. I don't care how good a VR headset you have. If you get tired of playing, one game, whatever that game is. And so how do we generate content rapidly? The tools aren't there yet. We're still using CAD tools basically to create content. And that's why things like Tilt Brush are so exciting, because now we have a much closer way to tap the artists and the designers. They are going to be the content makers, not the engineers and the computer scientists. And we need to put in their hands ways to create this content quickly and good content, and understand the principles of making immersive virtual worlds. And I think that is the biggest thing, is getting this in the hands of all those independent developers. When we have a hackathon, for example, here in Seattle, one of the ones we had last year, I think it was, we had 350 hackers show up. 350. And they all wanted to build virtual worlds. 48 hours they had to form teams and to build a virtual world. And they lined up that first day, first night, and they had 15 seconds to talk about themselves and what they wanted to do. And one guy shows up and he says, okay, I'm a C++ programmer. I want to build a world that helps fight communicable diseases or something. Then the next one shows up and says, well, actually, I'll compose music. And I would like to compose music that would go along with one of the worlds that's built. And another one says, well, I'm actually a performer. I'd like to perform that music, a musical performer. Another one says, I'm a graphic artist. Another one says, I don't know anything. I just love this stuff and I want to contribute to a project. Magically, those people get together and form these teams. And by the end of 48 hours, you have these worlds that'll just blow you away. And then often those teams form companies because they fall in love with each other. They want to work together. This magic happens. So that's what we have to unleash. We have to get it out of the hands of the engineers and into the hands of these creators to make the worlds. And that's what will propel this. Now, what will happen in the future? We're going to have AI. We're going to have some automatic algorithms that do things. Matter of fact, I'm working on a proposal right now to the government to take my virtual retinal display and to use it for low vision applications for people who have problems with sarcoma, traumatic brain injury, things like that, to be able to see again. And one of the things that I'm proposing is an automatic system, is a machine learning system that actually does this using the virtual retinal display, almost like a laser ophthalmoscope, to map out the retina, find out the regions that are healthy, and then remap the things that you would see in the regions that aren't healthy to the ones that are healthy, and then train the people on how to use that. So this, using machine learning, using AI, neural net technology, all these kind of things are going to happen. And so we're going to have this combination of IA, intelligent amplification, going with AI. And then of course, the entertainment, the data mining, the surgery, the training surgeons, training teachers, it's all going to be the pull that's going to get it to happen. We have to get the pull. Up to this point in time, we've been pushing. We've been pushing the technology to get it to a point where it really worked. We now need to have the other side pulling. Yeah, I need this for HR. I need this for teaching. I need it for doing surgery, telepresence, whatever, telehealth.
Okay. So I hope that answered the question, Kunal. Yeah, I know I said the last one was the last question, but I'm going to sneak one more in because I'm the host. So so I was just wondering.
You have the right. You have the
yes,
power.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough actually to visit the computer science museum, I think about 2 to 3 years ago, and I got to see some of the old headsets, including the Sword of Damocles. So I was just wondering that you showed some of this really interesting headsets done in the 60s and 80s as well. Are they on display somewhere for us to actually have a look?
Well, there's not one place to do that. There is the Living Computer Museum at the in Seattle. Paul Allen started this Living Computer Museum. They have a lot of the archives from my HIT lab and some of the headsets and things like that. There is one at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where I did a lot of the original work. We have sort of a shrine there of all these old headsets. And actually that optical bench for the virtual retinal display that I showed you is actually in a storage locker not far from me that I'm waiting to give it to the Smithsonian Institute, because at some time it's going to be they're really going to want to have it. And so it'll be on display at Washington, D.C., like some of the early computers and some of the early work done in photography and things like that. Because this is a breakthrough technology where you're scanning an image directly on the retina of the eye.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much again, Tom, for sharing your experience with us, as well as everyone here for joining this talk. I hope everyone gained something from it as well. So,
Thanks so much, Tom. It's great to see you. Oh, sorry, Pi, go ahead.
No, I was just thanking everyone, basically. So
Yeah. Thanks for everyone.
All of you here next year. We're going to plan for a VR conference middle to late next year, and hopefully Tom will be able to join in face to face, and so some of you will have to come and meet him face to face. So it'll be great to have him.
You bet. And of course, you're welcome to come to Seattle too, and we'll put you in a harness and knock you off your feet, exciting your far peripheral retina.
That's a great plan. It sounds like a great plan. Let's do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. I look forward to meeting you someday. And you're in a great place. What you're doing in the empathic lab is phenomenal. This is all a part of creating this desire for people, this lights, striking the match, lighting the fire, so that we can use this technology to really help people. And part of that is generating a sense of empathy and compassion. And with that, I think this will be an amazing tool of the future of helping the world.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, guys.
Thank you very much.
Be good.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll end the recording now.
Be safe.